Bonjour tout le monde.
Good afternoon once again, and now I will ask each of you to welcome and applaud two people that will come and speak in the name of the Coalition Against Police Brutality and Anti-Racism in Switzerland, whom I call to the stage now. Good afternoon. It is quite difficult to speak after the film we just saw. It is a film that really affects us in our core, as it shows due to the extent to which it shows the reality we're experiencing today. To start with, we'd like to thank all the people in struggle here and elsewhere, people struggling against police brutality and state violence in a perspective of anti-racism, political anti-racism. The presence of international activists, such as those present here today, honors us. But we must not forget, on the contrary, that the police also kills in Switzerland. Despite the invisibilization of a number of political and cultural institutions to which the FIFDH contributes, it is important to know that we are fighting. Even if we weren't invited here today, even if we had to fight for the right to speak here today, you should know that our streets echo the names of the victims of state violence. We, in fact, have written here a non-exhaustive list of people who were victims of police brutality here in Switzerland, who have died of police brutality here in Switzerland. I take the floor today in the name of Justice for Mike, Collectif Kiboko, Akiltour, Collectif Afro-Suisse, Outrage Collectif, and in memory of Hervé, Lamine, Mike, and Zoe, just to name a few. Hervé Bondembe Mandundu was shot on November 6, 2016. He was shot 3 times in his home in Bé, in Switzerland, during a police intervention for nighttime disturbances. Despite inconsistencies in the police version, the officer responsible was acquitted and compensated 35,000 francs for his suffering. The self-defense of the police officer was recognized by the judiciary, despite the fact that he had in no way been attacked or injured by Hervé, and that Hervé did die. Lamine Fati. Lamine Fati was found dead in his cell on October 22nd, 2017 in Lausanne. He had been arrested in place of a namesake and deprived of medical treatment despite his poor state of health and the medical necessity of his treatment. The case was closed in December 2023 despite flagrant misconduct on the part of the police and the ill treatment he suffered in the various institutions in whose care Lamine was left that night, all of which have led to his death. Mike Ben Peter was killed on March 1st, 2018 in Lausanne after a belly tackle exerted on him by 6 police officers. Despite his cries for help, the 6 cops were acquitted and compensated in June 2023. His family is continuing the fight and has lodged an appeal with the cantonal court. The trial will take place at the beginning of July 2024, and it will mobilize international experts, which will generate considerable costs for the family. We'd like to therefore ask you for your support, thanks to the bank details, which will be available in the documentation in the entrance, and that you can see in the slide behind me, and that will also be available in the video that will follow. Roger William Nzoy. Roger Nzoy was killed on August 31st, 2021 at the Morges railway station while standing on a deserted platform in distress and without a gun. Nzoy was shot several times in front of numerous witnesses. His family and friends are still fighting to this day against the outright dismissal of the case and are calling for the widespread support to ensure that a fair trial is held and that there is at least an independent investigation instead of huge denial. These police murders are the result of racism on part of all institutions and not just individual police officers. These inquiries and judgment are biased and lead to impunity and to sexist crimes. In parallel, while the mainstream media are lining up to smear the names and memories of the victims, and while the justice is hiding behind police versions, we have chosen to fight alongside the families for truth and justice. We fight because human rights are for all of us. We're fighting because police violence is the result of racism. And in Switzerland, too, racism kills. Good afternoon, everyone. As my comrade has just explained, we weren't meant to take the floor today, so I will apologize for the tardiness at which I wrote my speech, and I thank the coalition for the trust placed in me and when they asked me to take the floor in their name. The coalition is composed with collectives that we shouldn't need to introduce anymore, collectives for which we are numerous in today and for which we have the greatest respect. I would like to thank also Simon Ta, who is the lawyer of Mike Binter's family. Mike Binter is this black man that was just spoken of and that was killed in the Vaud canton 6 years ago. Simon Ta is a seasoned member of the Geneva bar and whose expertise would have been precious and indispensable to today's exchange, but who unfortunately is unable to be with us today, and who has honored me with his trust in order to fill the huge gap that his absence represents around this table. So, such as my colleague said, the objective of my presence on stage is to remind each of you that Switzerland is not exempt from the systemic problem that police brutalities represent. On the contrary, with Simon Ta, but also with the Comité La Vérité pour Adama, founded by Assa Traoré and the association organization Akil Tour and the NGO International Services for Human Rights, we have presented a joint report to the High Commissioner for Human Rights in the UN in December 2020 on the cases of Mike Ben-Peter and Adam Traoré, cases which are incredibly similar, not only amongst themselves, but also with numerous other cases of Afro-descendant people who have died due to prone restraint, such as Eric Garner. The similarities are such that to doubt the systemic aspect of such cases equals to not knowing what systemic means. It is not by chance that each time a black man dies to a so-called muscle intervention by the police, whether they are in France, in Switzerland, in the United States, there will always be a public prosecutor who half a second after their death will blame this death on an overdose before seeing their hypothesis, this hasted hypothesis, destroyed by toxicologic reports. It is not by chance that when a black man dies in the hand of the police, whether we are in France, in Switzerland, or in the United States, there will always be coroners and other forensic experts who will blame this death on the rain, the good weather, the plague, cholera, or some cardiac disease that was undetected until then, and who will have precisely chosen the moment of arrest to show up, or any other cause, but never is it blamed on the police, on police actions. It is not by chance that on these types of issues, even science, which is meant to be objective, is always siding on the side of power. The question of legal forensic expertise and the huge battles they require, as well as the problematic of the independence of experts, is a crucial issue which is extremely sensitive, of which both Assa Traoré and Simonta are experiencing. And this is a problem we're also knowing in Switzerland. In Switzerland, to find a forensic expert who are independent in procedures that implicate authorities or people linked to the authorities, for instance, when we speak of medical error or police brutality, to find experts in these procedures equals to finding a needle in a haystack. And to commit into a extremely time-consuming and energy-consuming fight that are usually lost in advance. I'll send you back to an article that was published. I'd like to refer to an article that was published by Blick in 2016 that vulgarizes in a way that's extremely synthetic, but also subtle, the results that were found by American experts on the cause of death of Mike Ben Peter, and the link and that sees the cause of the prone restraint for his death. This link, which had been denied and refused by the prosecutor during the trial last year. And it is not also by chance that following numerous years of inquiries, when there is an inquiry, that these files, whether in France, in Switzerland, or in the US, always lead to the acquittal of the policemen who are involved in the process. As my colleague has said, 2023 has led to the permanent acquittal of the policeman who implicated in the death of Hervé Mandundu, for whom the prosecutor had decided that he hadn't gone beyond legitimate self-defense when he shot a man who was unarmed and who was at a distance from him, whereas the federal tribunal a few weeks ago reprimanded someone who wasn't a policeman, who had seen his hand pierced by people who had intruded in his home and when shooting in a direction. In that case, the federal tribunal had recognized that this person had gone beyond legitimate self-defense. We will appreciate what we're able to qualify as a double standard. The year 2023 was also marked by the highly questionable acquittal and scandalous acquittal of policemen involved in the death of Mike Ben Peter. This acquittal was pronounced at the end of an extremely concerning trial, a parody of a trial in which we saw criminal authority ask themselves whether the shouts, the screaming of a person who was in handcuff and on which 4 or 5 policemen were sitting, that the witnesses have described as shouting in distress. They questioned whether this person was shouting in pain or of rage, because an African scream of pain is equivalent to a scream of pain is very different than that of a white person. And that is the level of the judicial debate in Switzerland. Fortunately, the judicial system with a capital J is not summarized by national instances, as shown by the recent decision of the European Court of Human Rights in the case of Mohamed Wabele, who has since Switzerland being condemned for racial profiling for the first time after a number of national instances had refused to take on the issue of racial profiling. The importance of supranational instances on human rights, we're thinking of the Human Rights Court of Justice in Europe, as well as UN treaty bodies, is crucial for victims and their defenders, who from the start have to prepare themselves for long and cost-consuming procedures on a level national with a very low rate of success, and who had from the start have to aim for the supranational instances, who are at this stage the only ones able to remind France, Switzerland, and others that they are not islands of impunity evolving in a judicial black hole, but there are states with obligation to which they have to comply. I have spoken of police brutality against black men, but naturally the nature of systemic violences against men is also expressed around women, gender minorities, and the ensemble of racialized people, which doesn't mean that white people are not experiencing such violence, but racialized people are particularly exposed and disproportionately exposed to police brutality. I have had to also defend some people, some young men, very young people come from the Maghreb, Morocco, Algeria, and also we see extremely harmful tendencies of systemic patterns, and in the majority of cases the people I have received were extremely wrong, young people in a situation deemed as irregular, illegal, people without resources, without family, and these people are constantly being stopped for crimes which are minor or non-existent, and while they're interrogated, these people are being beat up by police, insulted by police, and following the issue, they are constantly being thrown into jail in provisional detention because the claim that they were trying to flee is always retained because this person was in an irregular situation. So we consider that there is a risk for them to flee because of their irregular situation, or the risk for them to fall in clandestinity. So the fear that one may not be able to arrest them in the future because they might have fled to one of their numerous villas in Europe, or they might have gotten lost within the Swiss population in this really large country that is Switzerland. Therefore a risk of fleeing is always retained, while ignoring that these people without resources, with their families, are often found in the same places. Finally, very easy to find, since these are places that the police knows by heart, since they do not hesitate to go and arrest them anytime they feel like it. This is another level of institutional violence, with systematic detentions, which sometimes last for a very long time, while the police inquires on the potential crime that one may blame them with, because for our authorities it seems reasonable to take a full semester or more to inquire about the theft of 2 shirts, of that of 1 cellular phone. And so, as I have said, and I will soon conclude, the harmful tendency trend which I have seen with these clients is the refusal to complain when they are subjected to violence. They tell us in all confidentiality, but they do not want to press charges, because the reality in Geneva is that a complaint against the police will create greater risk of being opposed, a counter-complaint for defamation. And the reality is also that the police and the word of the police is seen as just and true. Everything that the police says seems to be true and exists, and they do not need to prove it. And therefore, there is a reversal of the burden of proof, which is not only extremely heavy to carry for victims, but also illegal and goes against the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights, who has statuted that when a person was in good shape before meeting the police and they come out of the detention either bruised or dead, there is a suspicion that there has been police brutality, and it is for authorities to prove that violence hasn't taken place and not the opposite. And I will stop now by reminding you of the importance of video filming, because in these types of procedures and many other procedures, in order to face the heavy weight of police words and police tale being taken as true, only videos can sometimes save us. Thank you for listening.
Mars 2018, Mike Ben-Peter est tué lors d'un contrôle de police, lors d'une opération anti-deal en ville de Lausanne. Soutien pour la famille de Mike, c'est le nom de l'association qui a été créée récemment afin d'apporter une aide financière à la famille de Mike Ben-Peter. Justice pour Mike, Collectif Kiboko ou encore l'affaire Mike Ben-Peter. Ce sont des termes que vous avez certainement entendus, que ce soit sur les réseaux sociaux ou dans les médias. Mars 2018, Mike Ben-Peter est tué lors d'un contrôle de police, lors d'une opération anti-deal en ville de Lausanne. Le procès a eu lieu en 2023. Il a révélé que les policiers n'ont laissé aucune chance à Mike. Ils l'ont sprayé au poivre, frappé et se sont mis à 6 sur lui pendant de longues minutes. Malgré tout cela, ils ont été acquittés. Mike était une personne noire. Et on peut considérer cet événement comme un simple fait divers. Au contraire, cela vient confirmer une tendance. En Suisse, lorsqu'on est une personne noire, maghrébine, sud-américaine, tamile, originaire des Balkans ou du Moyen-Orient, les risques ne sont pas les mêmes lorsqu'on est confronté à la police. Des personnes, des associations, des collectifs ou des partis politiques ont tenté et tentent encore d'en faire une question politique justement. On parlera alors de profilage racial ou de racisme systémique. Toutes ces personnes tentent au mieux de porter cela à une échelle plus globale, c'est-à-dire à l'échelle nationale. Mais ce drame, c'est avant tout celui d'une famille, celui de son frère Roger et celui de sa femme Bridget. Bridget vit désormais en Espagne avec ses 3 enfants, âgés de 16, 12 et 5 ans. Bridget était enceinte de 2 mois lorsque son mari a été tué. Aujourd'hui, c'est pour elle, mais surtout pour ses enfants, que Bridget veut continuer à se battre, afin que l'image de son mari ne soit pas uniquement celle véhiculée par les médias, mais aussi et simplement pour honorer la mémoire de son mari et père de ses enfants. Pour y arriver, Bridget a besoin d'aide. Disons-le clairement, elle a besoin d'argent. Aujourd'hui, elle est seule avec ses 3 enfants et elle peine à assurer les frais du quotidien. Que ce soit son loyer à 900 €, les frais de scolarité, les frais de garde lorsqu'elle part au travail. Elle se retrouve face à un choix. Continuer de se battre pour honorer la mémoire de Mike et payer les futures démarches juridiques ou assurer au mieux le quotidien de sa famille. C'est dans ce cadre-là que nous faisons appel à vous. Soutenez la famille de Mike, soutenez Bridget, soutenez ses enfants.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Je suis vraiment très honorée d'être
I am truly honored to be here with you today and to moderate this panel, which will be of the greatest quality. I think you will have understood that the subjects we're dealing with are not easy. They carry a heavy history for all of us because we're speaking of racism and when it violently kills or kills slowly. And despite the subject not being easy, we will try to make this conversation as interesting and relevant as possible. I will ask my guests, actually, no, the festival's guest, I'm only moderating. I will ask Yasser Louati to join me on stage. He's a human rights activist whom you have seen in the film. Good afternoon, Yasser. Please take a seat. I also see on the first row, ready to come up, Mrs. Assa Traoré, the activist from the Committee Justice and Truth for Adama Traoré. Assa, welcome. I will now turn to my left in order to greet her. She honors her with her presence. Good afternoon, Professor Angela Davis. Please join us on stage. Do I need to introduce you? An Afro-American activist, professor of philosophy, a writer. Are there steps on this side?
Je vous en prie, madame. Et enfin, c'est un peu une invitée surprise.
And also, and now we have a special guest who will honor us with their presence. A special guest who honors us with her presence today, Rokhaya Diallo, and who will introduce this debate.
C'est déjà très émouvant, je pense, pour tout le monde dans la salle.
This is already very emotional for everyone in the room today, to see all of us here today, because the struggles you are leading are transversal to many countries and are subjects that concern all of us. Rokhaya, you have the floor. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm extremely emotional after everything that has been said and that sets us into the local context. I therefore thank the collectives for taking the floor. I will take the floor only once as an introduction to create a transition between the film, the beautiful interventions with her, and the conversation, which is extremely promising. And so the film, Le Repli, evokes the worrying drift in France, as well as the systemic oppression of people in minority situation, which is a global phenomenon rooted in centuries old of slavery and colonization. And capitalism. As you have heard, Switzerland is far from exempt. I'm also aware that I'm speaking here in a country where many people are experimenting locally the horrors of systemic racism. I cannot ignore the contents and immediate environment which will follow the discussion. And I thank once again the collectives for taking the floor and calling on us to act. Many of you today have come here to hear Angela Davis, Assa Traoré, and are discovering for part of the Yasser Louati's story. These are three people who, in different ways, have been exposed to the brutality and institutional violence in France and in the United States. The iconization and individualization of struggles tends to make us forget the flesh and blood beings who experience, on their own level, the irreversible consequences of the state logics that hit marginalized group. In Brazil, for example, the short life of Brazilian politician Marielle Franco, an activist for the rights of women, for LGBTIQ+ people, for black people, and the poorest in general, came to a brutal end in 2018 with 5 bullets to the head. Marielle Franco has paid with her life her courage. And throughout the world, how many activists are reduced to silence in similar ways? Cases and murders such as this one are certainly the most tragic, but there are many ways of keeping activists quiet. We all know the story of Angela Davis, Professor Angela Davis, her confrontation with the U.S. police and justice system. Her commitment hasn't wavered since, and today we're fortunate to be able to benefit from the expertise she's developed over decades of struggles and reflection. Assa Traoré may be triumphantly welcomed in Geneva today, but her own country has been far less kind towards her. Not content of never having granted her or her family the right to see the gendarmes responsible for her brother's death brought to justice, France has stigmatized her, enabling the media and institutions to demonize her on a daily basis. While her brothers have been exposed to brutal police repression, it is impossible for her to speak out in an institution like the one we find ourselves in today without provoking controversy. Yet in France, Yasser Louati has lived through loneliness and isolation on judicial rights, and without most people whose rights he defends on a daily basis being aware of the cruel experience that was his. This, I believe, this requires that we salute each of them, applaud each of them. I would like to underline the specific vulnerability of women when state violence is expressed. And amongst these women, some are particularly marginalized. In France, while Me Too is on all lips, Muslim women see the state authorize more and more the possibility to measure the adequacy of the length of their clothes to the value of the Republic, to the values of the Republic. Trans and non-binary people, particularly women and non-binary people, are seeing their reproductive rights denied, are faced with hate crimes. Women who live with disabilities are on a daily basis confronted with hostile policies that ignore them and fight in an astonishing silence. And the film clearly shows how this violence is deployed against the thousands of people displaced by migration. In 2016, the day after Adama Traoré was killed, 2,500 refugees, among which 100 women and children, were ruthlessly evacuated from their makeshift dwellings in Paris by the police. And this violence unfolds beyond our borders with mechanisms like Frontex, who claim to protect our borders as if we were at war, but in reality endanger the hundreds of individuals every day. This week, 60 people in exile, children, women, and men trying to reach Europe from Libya, died of hunger and thirst. According to NGOs, their appeals for help were ignored. They starve to death and thirst on the borders of the world's richest countries. Their tragic fate coincided of 2,500 who disappeared in similar circumstances in 2023. In 10 years since 2014, about 30,000 people have been left to die on Europe's doorstep by our democracies. And we know that these people have fled unbearable political and economical circumstances, often rooted in the oppressive conditions enjoyed by our nations. How can we forget that countries like the United States and France are arming Israel, which is massacring the Palestinian population as we speak?
Comment ne pas oublier que le calvaire qui est vécu par les Congolaises.
How can we forget the harm, that what is experienced by Congolese find its source in the colonial history of Congo, but also in the way of life that we live in Western countries?
C'est pourquoi nos luttes.
This is why our struggles need to be led on an international level with trans-border solidarity. I look forward to hearing a transatlantic conversation which shall echo this need for our struggles to converge. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Rokhaya.
Thank you very much, Rokhaya. You took time to introduce each one of our guests, but you are part of those who in France and elsewhere in the world have put under the limelight the issues of systemic racism, police violence. So if we're here, it's also because of you and because of those who fought before you. I'm extremely humbled by your presence. We're extremely proud, and we're by your side to fight as long as necessary in Switzerland and France, as well as in the United States.
Rokhaya, tu parlais du film.
Rokhaya, you spoke about the movie. We'll come back to it. I think it's very important to speak about what you saw on screen. I think you can also applaud the filmmaker. I don't remember where he is. Oh, yes, he's right there, Joseph Paris. Please stand up.
Bravo, bravo pour ce film.
Congratulations. Congratulations on your movie. I think I can speak on behalf of everybody here. It's anxiety-inducing. It's very preoccupying. Thank you for showing it to us. I'm also thinking about Yasser Louati, who's with us, who's the main protagonist of this movie. There's something that struck me very much. It speaks about the post-attack climate in France. We see you on TV. We know exactly what it is to be live on TV following a major political crisis. Is it the case today in France that there's still suspicion towards the Muslims, that they need to call out attacks, be it in France or elsewhere, for geopolitical reasons? Rokhaya Diallo spoke about Palestine. So in France, is there a general suspicion against the Muslim population? How does this translate in real fact? Thank you very much, Rokhaya, for your introduction, and thanks to you, Nesrine. I'm extremely honored to meet Angela Davis in person. I'm a part of a generation who grew up looking at her, following her struggles and her fights. This suspicion used to be, well, you need to call out terrorism. Nowadays, it goes even further than that. We no longer want you to be there. And they're no longer hiding to say that. There no longer are threats, X and Y. There used to be a triple threat, identity, security, and economics. They take our jobs. Nowadays, they say on major public networks, on French TV or elsewhere, you've got nothing to do here. And these are people who've been in France for 3-4 generations, and France owes its freedom from World War II, Moroccan soldiers, Senegalese soldiers, the so-called tirailleurs sénégalais, all those who were conscripted in the colonies. France has a huge debt in terms of its economic well-being. They were the ones who rebuilt France following the Second World War. They were brought in to rebuild a country that had been betrayed by its elite. And today we're telling their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, you've got nothing to do in France. On the contrary, I think this suspicion is the expression of what Malcolm X called white guilt. France does not want to recognize, to acknowledge this debt, because their mere presence reminds France of its history in Africa, in the West Indies, in Asia and elsewhere. And to quote a rapper, each history has its starting point. And if we're here to discuss these issues, it's because at one point you decided to link your history to ours.
Et on vous suit justement.
And we follow you. I don't know Angela Davis, so we might not be on a first-name basis with Angela Davis, but we are on a first-name basis with the others. So we follow you. You're preparing to go on TV. Oh, okay. So we can be on a first-name basis with Angela Davis. So that's huge progress. So we follow you. You're preparing before your interviews. It's as if you were preparing as a boxer to go on the ring. You're there. You train. You practice, and we realize that you're really in a tight spot. That's what Rokhaya Diallo told us about. You know that you may be cut off, you may be interrupted, your words can be instrumentalized against you. Remember the episode at CNN? They talk about what you said, they make fun of you when you're no longer live. How do you prepare, and why do you accept, why do you refuse to be interviewed in such a way? Well, I'd say there's always a spiritual work that I carry out. I need to bear in mind the fact that who I'm doing this for and why. It's not a matter of ego or visibility. That's not why I do it. Otherwise, I focus on myself and not on the fight I'm waging. From then on, I know that the horizon I'm defending is not mine. It's much broader than that. And from then on, I prepare. I sometimes prepare for 2 hours for 2 minutes of interview. And I say to myself, I cannot make any mistake. The person in front of me can make a mistake, they can't even lie, they'll be reinvited. It's not my case. I can't control everything, but I need to look at every single potential angle of attack and prepare myself to it. And because I've prepared myself to it, it's as if I were stretching before exercising. And then when do I say yes? When do I say no to these interviews? After 2015, it was really hard to refuse these interviews. I bore in mind the fact that the state has all the means to invent discourse and impose it. It imposes a reality to which we need to conform, with which we need to comply, ex nihilo, and we need to adapt. And in this case, I said, I'll accept all interviews. And following 2015, I did the first interview on CNN. I think it was my first interview on TV, live on TV. It was quite an experience, let me tell you. And I realized what it was like, and I thought, I've got to do as many interviews as possible. I speak 3 languages, French, English, and Arabic. And I thought, well, if they're inventing a discourse, I'll have to multiply my angles of attack to respond as much as possible. And it worked to a certain extent. I know that. Because once at the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, mini UN for Europe based in Warsaw, someone came to see me and told me, Yasser, the French embassy asked us to blacklist you because what you're saying puts them at odds with other member states. And that's when I realized that I need to be interviewed as much as possible. My only red line is not to be interviewed by media who are representing ideas that are completely at odds with me. But the thing you need to realize is that it's not a level playing field when you're interviewed. We're interrupted, we're not speaking extensively. If we don't say what we mean to say, no one will do so instead of us.
Assa, on te voit toi aussi dans le film.
Assa, we see you in the film ever since 2016. You call out the crime of which your brother was a victim. You've been pushed in the limelight. How did you experience this? Did you immediately realize the mechanisms at stake? Very often victims of police violence are made into perpetrators and criminals. And then there's been an evolution, very recent evolution with a causal relationship between Adama's arrest and his death. Can you tell us a little more about this? Can you tell us a little more how you live this and how you try and gain traction about the legal implications around this case? Good afternoon. Thanks for having invited me. Good afternoon, Nesrine. It's a real honor for me to be here, and it's a real honor for me to bear the same name as my brother. And it's an honor for me to make you remember the name of Adama, thanks to the Afro-Swiss collective who took the floor on behalf of the other collective. It's very important to do so. You can't take the floor elsewhere in the world. If others' voices are not powerful, that's the only way we can move forward. That's the only way we can make things change. So thank you very much. Thanks for having shared what's happening here. Thanks for having shared with us the names. We'll be taking them home with us to France, and we'll be able to call out alongside you all these cases. This struggle, I've been here for 8 years. You have to have stamina to wage these battles. You need to be physically strong, mentally strong. You have to have money. You have to be powerful. That's what you need to be. If we're here, it's because we have become soldiers. The system made us into soldiers against our will. We're there. We need to challenge them. We need to tell them that they don't have a license to kill on anybody. We're soldiers to tell them we'll continue to talk. We'll continue to impose our voice anywhere, everywhere, even in France. In France, we were able to debate about police violence in the media. No one's prepared to have a relative die. I'd never thought that the police would kill one of my brothers. I was so far away of this notion. Just a brief anecdote. Just a few hours before the death of my brother, I was leaving for a trip. I was leaving for a business trip. I had gone to my mother's to drop off my kids. I saw all my brothers, just not Adama. I waited until 5:30. I called him up. Where are you, Adama? I'm leaving. I want to say goodbye to you. He said, why are you're leaving? And I said, yes, I've got a business trip, and I just wanted to give you a kiss. He said, Assa, do you want me to come back home? And I said, no, don't worry. I'll be coming back next week. Stay with your friends. My gift is on the way. It was his birthday. I ordered your present, and I told him I'll come straight back from the airport to give it to you. It was so far away from me, so far away from him, that we never thought of it. Leaving my neighborhood, I encountered the gendarme, and there's this knee-jerk reaction. I called home. I said, the gendarmes are there. Can you tell me, can you go and fetch my brothers so that they go back home? I was afraid. I was far away from imagining that my brother would die, but I did call them up, and the next day my brother died. When my brother died, I said, my brother died, but his name will live on. And I want the world, the whole world, to know that my brother was killed. And that's the only thing that helped me hang on until September. My brother died in the summer, and I didn't want this to become a minor issue in the news. I wanted the whole wide world to know that in France, a man was killed. My little brother was killed. Adama was killed on the day of his birthday. I had this rage, I had this pain, I had this grief. We had to exist. We imposed this question, the issue of police violence, which went beyond the death of my brother, beyond the death of Adama Traoré. It's the issue of all the Adama Traorés of France and in the world. You couldn't talk about police violence in France lest you were attacked. Rokhaya Traoré said so in her introduction. Assa Traoré is someone no one wants to see, no one wants to hear. But we did impose the issue of discrimination, of death, of police violence, police brutality, violence in the neighborhoods. We will fight. We will be on the front line. And as Rokhaya Traoré said, we will do so. Adama Traoré has 5 brothers. They were in prison because they got up and asked for the truth about their brother. Black men don't have the right to rise and ask for justice and truth when their black brother dies. They're either on the ground, 6 feet under, or in prison. That's the way they're seen. That's the way they are considered. Adama Traoré is 6 feet under. His brothers are in prison. His friends are in prison. And I, too, will be indicted. I'll be arraigned. I'll be in the dock facing the gendarme who killed my brother, because in the media I said that the gendarme had killed my brother. And I was able to speak last. I was the accused facing the gendarme who killed my brother. This is in France. This does not happen in the USA. We look very often at what's happening elsewhere. My trial lasted for 2 days, and I said to the judge that I would continue. I will go on, and I told the judge, today you've got a choice. You can be part of those who hindered me or not, because I will defend my brother's name. I will be acquitted. I will not add the name of the judge on the list of people who hindered the manifestation of the truth. When we speak about police violence, we can't only speak about the police. We have to look at the system and at how the state abets and helps turning discourse into fact. When my brother died, the gendarme did not lie. They said the truth. They said that Adama had carried more than 250 kilos, the weight of 3 bodies. He said, I cannot breathe. The gendarme said that they dragged Adama to the vehicle. They didn't lie. They told the truth. What we need to call out is everything that surrounds these cases, how the state and the system creates a lie. It creates law enforcement officers who lie. It creates attorney generals who lie. And that's what we need to reveal. We need to reveal the legal system for what it is. And to answer your question about the media, I don't debate with people who contradict the death of my brother. Adama Traoré died, so I don't debate with these people. I go to a TV channel, I say what I have to say, but I don't debate on what happened, on the death of a man, the death of my little brother who died on July 17th. I'm the one who has questions, and these questions have to be answered. Why did my brother die on that day? Why do our brothers die? Why is there so much hate? Why do they have a license to kill? Why do we still not have any justice? Why is the judiciary so long? We're the ones who demand answers to our questions. We're the ones who put the questions, and we continue to fight for this. And yes, there has been an evolution. There has been a recent development, and it's a real victory for us. I said a while ago I was indicted because I had said that the gendarme had killed my brother. And there was a 2-day trial, and a month month ago, the French justice system, because our lawyers fought, because the French population fought, because the whole wide world fought and put the situation in France in the limelight. There are members of the UN here. They also fought for us, fought against police violence and the death of my brother, and they recognized that the gendarmes were responsible for Adama's death. If they hadn't encountered my little brother on that day, July 19th, 2016, Adama wouldn't be dead. So we're not completely crazy. We told the truth right from the start, and the justice system acknowledged this, acknowledged the fact that the gendarmes were responsible. But they'll go even further. They'll say, yes, the gendarmes are responsible. There's been an expert report from Belgian experts who said that the gendarmes were responsible. We looked at a group of 9 experts who agreed with Belgian experts saying that the gendarmes were responsible. But the justice system will still ask for an abandonment of the case because Adama Traoré was tall, he was big, he was imposing, therefore the gendarmes had to use force. Because when it's our brothers, when it's black men from the neighborhood, when it's Arabs, their bodies can bear more weight, more violence, and that justifies violence at the hands of police officers, of gendarmes. They say they used force because he was tall, he was big, but we're expecting a ruling. The ruling should come on May 16th. And either there'll be an arraignment, an abandonment, or reconstitution. But we continue to wage our fights in the media, everywhere. We continue to make our voices heard. Our media strategy is that we do not speak to all media. We cherry pick them. There are some media that we refuse to talk to. We're not openly invited everywhere, but there has been good media coverage of the Adama Traoré case, which means that the whole world has heard about it.
Assa, you also made a link with the United States and with George Floyd, and I remember the post-lockdown demonstration in front of the Justice Tribunal, which was very imposing. And it was amazing to see all the youth mobilized, and they was trying to create a link with everything that was going cross-Atlantic and in France. It was a very strong moment. And Angela, as an American, you have a very early, you started following Assa Traoré and her fight. You understood how it was important. Why is it always important to remind everyone of what systemic racism is and to create links, bridges between Western countries? Why this union between struggles is so important?
Bonjour.
Hello.
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. The film was very gripping, and I'll say a few words about that, if I may.
You can.
And you know, thank you so much, Rokhaya, for your introductory remarks. It's always wonderful to see you, Assa, and I'm always inspired by the spirit of your struggle. Yeah, as Rokhaya pointed out, this is a global struggle. We tend to think about racist police violence as being national or regional. In the U.S. for a long time, it was only about the South. It wasn't about the entire United States. We thought about it as being connected to South Africa. So there are only certain regions where racism is so intense that people die as a result. And If I can say just a few words, because this film affected me really profoundly. Thank you, so much for making the film. There was a time when I fell in love with France. It was really my first academic love, j'ai appris le français.
Well, then I learned French, and I would very much like to speak French. I liked speaking French. I had French clothes. I had clothes from sub-Saharan Africa.
I felt a closeness with the country that proclaimed liberté, fraternité, right? The first time I came to France, two women from Martinique told me to be very careful. It was the summer of 1962. They told me to be very careful because I might be mistaken for an Algerian. Well, the next thing I'll say is that when I myself was in jail, there was an enormous campaign for my freedom all over the world. But in France, it was very special. My sister participated in a march of hundreds of thousands of people that were, led by French artists and intellectuals. And so I feel like I've had this special relationship with France, even though I had many conversations with people about the racism in France and why it wasn't acknowledged. I can remember once being interviewed by Gaston Monnerville, who I was really shocked to discover that there was a black president of the Senate, and he had a television show for some years afterwards, and he had me on the show. And so I asked him what his experience of French racism was. And he said, il n'y a pas de racisme en France.
There is no racism in France, is what I was answered. But the film has shown you that there was.
So over the last years, as the consciousness has developed, and certainly the case of Adama Traoré and many other such cases, I feel very sad. And this is my personal reaction, and at the same time very angry. And I think this film allowed us to see the extent to which the ideologies that have always been associated with France are based on a lie. And so I don't know. This is my personal struggle here because I have been. I used to be invited to come to France all the time, and I think once I began to publicly identify with the struggles of immigrants and the struggles of Arab people, the struggles of African people, Muslims, then the invitations stopped coming. So I just needed to say that before we engage in this conversation about the absolute importance of developing a global campaign against racist police violence. and let me say that we shouldn't forget that many police departments around the world, including in the US, have been trained by the IDF in Israel. So that the connection with what is now going on in Gaza is very powerful. And I think now I would just like to thank all of you for participating in this discussion and being the public face of the struggle against police racism and systemic racism more broadly, and being those who, Rokhaya, I know that you've suffered a great deal from the attacks, and so have you, as you pointed out, Yasser, and so have you, as you've pointed out, Assa. So I guess I would say that if I consider what the struggle against racism, racist violence, systemic structural police violence was like 50 years ago, I would never have imagined that this is where we would be today. But at the same time, it's an indication of the fact that that we recognize the importance of internationalism, and that we understand the basis of structural racism, and it has to do with colonialism and with slavery. And that is why countries such as France, and I guess we should say something about Switzerland as well, but that's already been talked about, so thank you so much for giving us that information. Okay.
Justement,
Angela, since the 70s, you have been fighting against all of these oppressions. Is there hope? Is there anything positive that you see being organized? I'm thinking of social media and their ability to mobilize. And we've spoken of mobilizations around Adama Traoré, as well as others in France. I'm thinking of the death of Naël. We'll get back to it with Yasser later. What do you see as positive? What can give us hope to continue? Because we haven't reached the end of this struggle. How can we continue? How can we foresee the light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I always like to defer to Mariam Kaba, who is an activist in the United States, who points out that hope is not something that we simply have. It's not something to be given or acquired. It's what she calls a discipline. Hope is a discipline. So it's not simply about a passive relationship to hope. It's about generating hope. It's about creating hope. And that is the work of activists as we struggle, whether we're struggling against the after effects of colonialism, capitalism, whether we're struggling against homophobia and sexism, we have to believe that a different world is possible. If we don't believe that, we cannot struggle. And therefore, in the process of engaging in these struggles, we generate hope, hope for ourselves and hope for future generations.
Thank you very much.
Yasser, justement,
Yasser, I wanted you to react about this notion of internationalization of struggles and also the matter of convergences. This is something that the director wanted to have as a central issue in the film, is when they attack some of the minorities, they will continue and they will widen their repression and oppression. And we see it when you speak of police repression against ecologist demonstration. I'm thinking also of Assa Traoré, who joined the Gilets jaunes demonstrations at some point. So as a society, as an oppressed people, as a minority oppressed in a country, why is it important to include in the documentary, to include an alert to say they're not just attacking Arabs and blacks, they're attacking everyone? Well, the central issue in the film is that it starts with a group of people, and then the cursor will change to a more central other population. And as far as France is concerned, and the examples are certainly not lacking with the mobilizations of the past few years, is that if we look into if we were to think of struggles as disconnected from one another, whether it's a ecological struggle, racism, sexism, all will point to the same issue: state violence, the non-transparency of institutions, the violence which is imposed on all levels, whether it's media violence, police violence, the mobilization of institutions in order to keep opponents quiet, the complaints of women who are victims of domestic violence, which are not being listened to. All we can say is, here's the problem. But no one says, I am denouncing the same adversary, I am defending the same opponent, and hardly do we ever see these struggles converge to say that we are victims to the oppression of the same oppressor. And there is a bias, particularly in some populations, particularly in Europe, having lived in the U.S., in Texas, very close to where Mrs. Davis comes from, is that we often feel safe when others are being attacked. Oh, these Arabs or blacks or in popular neighborhoods, and we kind of agree with that. But Cornel West said something really interesting in that regard, to say we are comfortable with injustice when we don't experience it ourselves. But at another time, when the majority group is being targeted, we will say, oh, but we've seen police hit blacks and Arabs, and we didn't feel concerned. And people who are part of the majority group must ask themselves whether they are finding complacence in their privilege, and that as long as this violence is imposed on others, they do not feel affected. But the more we see violence being imposed on blacks and Arabs, Romas, and other marginalized population, then we start thinking that if these bodies are experiencing violence, then maybe we shouldn't concern. But as far as I'm concerned, and after what happened after 2015, and I think maybe I will confess something here that will shock you, I had a hard time finding sympathy for mobilizations that were denouncing police brutality when these mobilizations said nothing for 20, 30 years. And in the case of France, we saw that the violence of municipal and national police have left popular areas and moved to central urban areas. And I even said this during the Nuit Debout mobilization post-2015. And I said openly, I said, as long as you don't converge towards popular areas, popular neighborhoods, you will end up like them. And there was a bit of polemic around that, but there wasn't really a real awareness of this privilege. But at the same time, we see that generational movements are forced to cease to take on this question, to tackle this question, to say we refuse violence on principle. But at the same time, I realize that the Gilets jaunes have experienced violence from the same police that kills blacks and Arabs. The mobilization against the reform of pensions has been crushed by the very same police that kills blacks and Arabs. And we must feel as it is our own struggle. And to conclude on what happened after 2015, what had truly revolted me and has led me to have a very critical discourse towards the French left, and particularly the Parisian left, which likes to have a certain fetishism in regards to decolonial struggles, but never listens to blacks and Arabs when they have ideas to share to contemporary blacks and Arabs. But when in meetings I hear left activists who are well experienced and who have started struggling before I was even born, who started telling the violence of the state of emergency after COP21. This means that in the week that followed the attacks on the Bataclan up to COP21, which occurred 4 or 5 weeks later, these violences, it was as if they hadn't counted. And all these families that had been traumatized, I was at the time in an organization we would recount these events. There were women torn from their bed, the children traumatized from seeing their doors broken down, their children being taken away, some mosques being ransacked when mosques were empty. In the case of the Mosque of Aubervilliers, the rector said, "Wait, I'll open the door," and the police said, "No, we are breaking down doors." And despite this, there were left-wing activists who said that the problem started when police tackled COP21. And I have hope because following generations are starting to normalize this convergence, and I will get to the point of the convergence of struggles, is that we see today that despite everything, some left-wing personalities who are younger also adhere to the discourse of the states when they tackle Muslims. The latest example is Sophie Binet, who now directs the CGT, so a major trade union in France, which we cannot accuse of being close to the power. But she has supported the struggle against the fight against the chase against abayas in school, of so-called Muslim dresses, and at the same time, the person who was struggling against Islamophobia. And when the state started their political year with trying to forbid the abaya, François Ruffieux said that the law of 2004 that was meant to forbid the hijab in schools was a law that protected laicity. Pardon me for saying it, but it is bullshit. The law in 2004 violates laicity because laicity We've gone from a laicity that imposes religious neutrality of the state to a laicity that imposes the invisibility of people who have a religion, particularly the Muslim religion. And this 2004 law had passed with a debate that was dying under the Stasi Commission. We've excluded women wearing hijab, but we've invited a National Front, the far-right parties, and to hear a potential presidential candidate who wants to be a candidate who gathers but forgets to gather blacks and Arabs and people from poorer areas with him. And the question is, how long will you carry this racist sword which you refuse to own? And I will now conclude here, Nesrine, if you'll allow me, on the question of the convergence of struggles. It is a beautiful struggle, but it is not something one can decree. It's something that we have to do on a daily basis. It means acting together, working together, because by working with people, do we create human warmth? Do we create common projects? Can we have common ambitions? Can we have common horizons? And it is through these common horizons that are hidden by the fear that is imposed as the state. Only then can they be overcome, when we accept that the life of another is not worth more than mine. And only when we tackle them, it's not a matter of whether it will be possible, it is a matter of when we will do it.
On va passer à un temps d'échange avec le public.
Let's move on to questions from the floor. I did check my timers. I still have a huge list of questions, but there were so many interesting things that were said that I didn't have time to exhaust my list of questions. There was something important, though, in the movie. The issue of police trade unions who want more. They want more rights. They want more weapons. I wanted to take up this issue because there was this attempt at extending the notion of self-defense. There was a case, the death of Naël last year in France, who was shot at point blank by a police officer. There are still lots of people being shot by police because they're escaping police roadblocks. So the police trade unions have pushed to have more power. Our session is called Who Will Watch the Watchmen? When I saw this title, I thought about the movie La Haine, where one of the characters is told, the police is there to protect you, and he answers, yes, but who protects me from the police? So I wanted to ask about the presence of police because it's important to do so. Can we do away with the police entirely? André Kuhn, who's a professor of criminal law and criminology, is here in the audience. I don't see him. Yes, he's over there. And he'll be able to take the floor on this. He asked this question when the police threatened to strike in France. So maybe we can start with you and then take questions from the floor. Thank you very much. I'm really not a racism expert. I'm an expert in criminology and especially the police. And when we try studying the police in criminology in Switzerland, we're facing a wall. We face a wall, you get no funding, you get very few answers to the questions that you raise. And to give you an example, would more police officers prevent crime, deter crime, or cause more crime? Do more policemen generate security or insecurity? Well, these are answers that I cannot give because I just do not know. The simple fact that police officers threatened to strike, my gut reaction was to say, well, finally, we'll be able to put such hypotheses to the test. We'll be able to tell what direction reality goes in. I dreamt of police strike to have fewer policemen in the streets to determine the impact that this could have. Now, obviously, police officers ended up not striking, so that did not happen. We were unable to determine that. But if you ask people, and this brings me back to the question you raised earlier, what's the point of the police? Well, it's law enforcement. They're there to enforce the law. But if you think that way, it means that each time an offense is perpetrated, and there are about 500,000 that are committed every year, this means that the police is challenged. It fails constantly and miserably. That's what scientific knowledge tells us. And when we say so, we're told, yes, but if there was no police, it would be even worse. But all of these are mere hypotheses, and hypotheses can not be refuted by knowledge. They have to be tested. Hypotheses have to be trialed. They have to be put to the test of reality. And that's exactly what I thought of when I was saying, please do strike. That way, we might be able to tell whether you have a positive or negative impact on the situation. In reality, and that'll be my finishing note because I don't want to take up too much time, it's much more interesting to listen to your panelists who are there to take up the issue at stake. But there are two main kinds of police. There's the police that tries to determine who the criminals are and try to smoke out criminals, and in such cases, the police has a high resolution rate. But if we turn towards the deterring effect of the police, preventative effect of the police, there are two kinds of police. There's the deterring police. That goes back to the 19th century, Boris Jovet, with the need of a violent police. And then there's another form of police, which is the preventative police. It's the proximity police, created by Robert Peel in the UK. His nickname was Bobby, hence the Bobbies. And this is a police that's closer to the population. It's there to assist the population, to support the population. You've got such police in the Koban in Japan. You could imagine having such a police with police officers who share the same culture as the population of a given neighborhood. coming from their ranks, and then there's the in-between. Our societies have the choice. We can either choose a preventative police that is at the service of authorities. It'll enforce law and be violent. And then there's the police that's at the service, that serves the population, and that's a choice that we can make. We can make it through elections and through a referenda here in Switzerland.
Merci pour votre intervention. Je pense que
Thank you very much for your contribution. I think there are 2 roving mics that are in the room. If you've got questions about racism, police violence, I'm sure our 3 or even 4 panelists will be very happy to answer. I see hands raised here and there at the back of the room.
Bonjour, merci à tous.
Good afternoon. Thanks to you all for the quality of your contributions.
Reminded us that hope is a discipline. Et ma question va porter sur ça, sur la discipline.
My question has to do with the discipline that is required from us in our struggles.
Moi, je n'ai pas d'enfants, mais par exemple,
I don't have any children,
battre pour le droit des crèches.
but I have no problem fighting for the right to daycare for my colleagues. There are many things that I'm not affected by, but which I find important to fight for. So why is it that when I'm part of a feminist group, I'm told the issue of racism will be dealt with later? Why is the issue of racism an issue that we can put aside,
Qui est reproché aux gens qui veulent lutter pour.
and people who want to fight for equal rights are accused of being separatists? But we have to be separatists if we want to bear messages that affect us first and foremost, but that ultimately will affect everyone. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for posing the question in that way. When I think about feminism, it's always an anti-racist feminism. It's always a feminism that is anti-capitalist. So I think that the problem is that feminism is often represented abstractly. And when it is represented abstractly, it appears as if it may have nothing to do with racism or capitalism. But we don't live our lives abstractly. We don't live in abstract context. So it's always very important to be explicit, and perhaps especially in Switzerland, especially in France, because there is a, I'm not as familiar with Switzerland as I am with France, and I know that there are very powerful feminist movements that are specifically anti-colonialist, decolonial feminist movements, anti-racist feminist movements, and perhaps may I respond just briefly to the comments about the role of the police?
Of course you can, of course. J'ai sorti mon plus bel accent.
I've been involved for many, 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 many years in the prison abolitionist movement. So, you know, we don't argue that we need better prisons because we recognize that the state of prisons in the US and internationally is very much linked to the assumption that prisons are permanent and that there is no alternative. As a matter of fact, Foucault pointed out that the very history of the prison is the history of the attempts to reform the prison. Now, So abolitionists say it's not about a better prison. It's about the possibility of life, of a life, social life, political life, without having to rely on these institutions that are institutionalized violence. And so one can extrapolate in relation to the police. We don't want better police. Because in the very first place, police, by definition, are trained in violence. Police embody state violence. That is what they do. I think it might be better to pose a question about the meaning of safety and security. What does it mean to be safe, to feel safe, to be secure? And just as we defer to the prison when it comes to questions of crime and punishment, we defer to the police when it comes to questions of security and safety. So what might it mean to imagine safety and security differently? What might it mean to formulate the question more broadly so that it's not simply about preventing violence through violence, so that it's not simply about the immediate situation at hand that police are generally called to respond to. It's about safety and security in a broader sense. So that would have to involve all kinds of other things that have nothing to do with the police. It would have to involve schools. It would have to involve housing for everyone. It would have to involve a reimagining of what it means to live together in human society. And then after that, we might have some questions about, what might be necessary in order to respond to a particular case involving violence. But the fact that the police, who are first and foremost trained in violence, are called for everything. A person has a mental breakdown. Who do you call? The police are called, and often, and I don't know whether that happens here, but I know that it happens in the US. I know that it happens in Israel and Palestine, that people end up being killed because they have issues, mental health issues. So what about reimagining the ways in which we can truly guarantee that people are safe in our world? We would have to think about many other kinds of institutions rather than institutions of armed humans who, in the very first place, defer to their weapons as the manner of resolving particular incidents that arise. So I would say that we need to abolish the police.
Merci, Angela.
Thank you, Angela. And to answer the question about police, you've said that we had the choice. We do not have a choice. If we did have a choice, then I think Adama Traoré wouldn't have died on July 19th, 2016. If we had the choice, many of the names that have been mentioned here today and this long list of people wouldn't be dead today. And what we need to consider in history is how police, and I will speak of French police, about how police was created. Police was created on the basis of racism. And when the police is created on the basis of racism, it doesn't give the option of life or death for racialized people. And when we look at people dying today, there's a number that was released last week, to not go too far, in France for the refusal to obey police order. The refusal to obey the people who have been killed are only black and Arab people, black and brown people. Refusal to obey, whether in France or in Switzerland, these happen every day, all the time. But there is a choice. There is a choice to shoot. There is a choice to bring down, to shoot in the head persons of color. And if we had the choice, these numbers wouldn't exist. But today we have a problem. We have a problem of recognition, recognizing history, of recognizing the role of France and the role of other people, the other colonizations. And as long as people do not own their role and do not own the fact that police was created on the basis of racism, we will not be able to move forward. And to own the fact that racism exists is not a weakness, but to own that there is racism within institutions and within the police can save lives. But within French colonization, the first official document, when a black enslaved person had gone in the street, went to the street, this person could be shot down. And that day, Adama Traoré didn't have his identity card, and he didn't have his identity card, which is a prolongation, which is synonymous to life for racialized people in France and in other countries. And if France and other countries have been condemned by the European Court of Human Rights for racial profiling, and that there were condemnations that were done, it is not by chance. We have racist police. We have states that do not own the fact that the police is racist. And if we had the possibility of choosing our police, then there ought to be a dialogue. But there isn't a dialogue. There is a very limited discourse. When my brother will have died, when George Floyd died, and we had the demonstration, the first demonstration took place in June, the French police said that we are denouncing these techniques for immobilization, which were at the time forbidden. And it was the Ministry of Interior who said that they would think about forbidding this process, and that the French policemen went to the street and they wanted to, they didn't want to stop using their handcuffs, and they wanted to keep using immobilization techniques that would kill people, and they would to kill black and brown people. And a few days later, we had a demonstration on June 13th, while the French police and the trade unions of the French police called on social media, on Twitter, by telling people in a neighborhood there are some painters who painted on the wall the faces of George Floyd and Adama Traoré, and they did a call on social media saying that they would call on other police officers to come with paint in order to delete the fresques that had been drawn of the faces of George Floyd and Adama Traoré who have been designed. It means that our black men cannot even exist even when they're dead. They go to the end by saying they have to delete even their faces of our dead black men. And this is because the police is racist, and it's racist because it was founded on the basis of racism, on racist fundamentals. You've spoken of Nael earlier, and the death of Nael is a broken youth. We have broken this youth. We have broken these men. These are men we destroy from the inside. These are men that are destroyed. And when the rising occurred in France, there are people just like us who said, but why are they doing this? They shouldn't do this. But we have taught this youth not to love their country. We have taught this youth not to love France, because there are children whom, as children already, were experimenting humiliation, repression. A child who undergoes an identity control when they're 12 years old. Amin Bentouti, we've seen him in the film. At the time, he was the youngest person detained. He was 13-year-old when he was thrown in jail. But if we can put a child in jail at age 13, if a child is a victim of humiliation at 13, and also we can speak of school institutions where there is humiliation when children are seen as not having their own space, not having the right to be there. And now we are pointing to hyperactive children, children with disabilities, whether they don't see well, they don't hear well. But this wasn't a possibility for racialized children. These are children who just set aside because we didn't care about the state of health. And it's our children who had to go outside, and they would go for help, look for help outside institutions. Which is why it's important to think of history and to recall history, because when we speak of the importance of history, it's not starting from us. It is starting from our ancestor, our parents who fought for the war. My grandparents have fought during the Second World War, as many others have in the European countries. And as long as we don't own this, if we had recognized the just value of the contribution of our parents and grandparents, if they had been recognized as the heroes, today we wouldn't say Assa Traoré. I would be considered as the granddaughter of a hero. And if we had considered our great-grandparents our hero, one wouldn't be able to kill the great-grandchildren of heroes. This is actually thought of, constructed, because at the time of colonization, when there was this ill treatment, it was this non-recognition, when people were deleted from history, it was to an end. Because if we were to consider our ancestors are heroes, then we too would be considered as heroes. And if my grandparents were considered as heroes, then today I would be, my title, my status would be of being the great or the granddaughter of heroes. But this is not something they could keep in order to be allowed to then kill their children, their grandchildren, to kill Nael, to kill all the youth, the young boys who have been put in jail. Many of them have been thrown in jail and have received extremely heavy sentences. And the fact that they are still to this day in prison, and this is a youth that is being broken. These are hopes that are being killed. And as Angela Davis has said before, we cannot struggle without hope. We cannot struggle without dreams. And they've understood this. And via police brutality, it is those hopes and those dreams which are being crushed.
Je crois qu'on a dépassé le temps imparti. Merci beaucoup, Assa. Je ne sais pas si je suis...
I think we've passed the time that was given to us, but I don't know whether I can take a bit longer. I think Yasser wanted to react. No, I'm being told that we have to stop. I think you have hundreds and thousands of questions. So we're being given an extra 2 minutes. So if you'll allow me, I will give the floor to Yasser on the question of police. But even I am speaking fast because I'm trying not to occupy space. We will give the floor to Yasser to answer on this question of police. But to remind you of certain elements about French police. We've spoken of many things. The national police, as it is known today in France, was born under a decree that was signed on August 14, 1941, by Philippe Pétain. When we're speaking of the racist basis of police, we're speaking of Pétain. And I think for the centralized police, it means that we don't know, not police, we're not going back to Fouché, for instance. And this same police, its first accomplishment was not to defend vulnerable people or to arrest the thieves. The first thing they did, Pétain, Bousquet, they deported thousands of Jews. And René Bousquet, we know about the Veldiv episode, and he himself Bousquet called and said that police can do great services to the population. So we have a police that was born at the hand of traitors who collaborated with the Nazis, and this very police This very police, to this day, to get back to the central issue today of who watches the watchmen, when as long as this police is not cleansed of others. In 1961, with the 200, 300 Algerians who were thrown in the River Seine by the national police, not only did we question the genesis of the police, nor the ideology that keeps it alive as an instituted body, nor the training of policemen and their excesses. And therefore, we see that there is a police that is there to perpetuate a modus operandi. And the question of who watches the police, the question is that it is us. But the problem is that we delegated our future to an institution that is as opaque, brutal, and authoritarian as the state, who has put in place a police which is racist and out of control. And we must keep in mind that in June, the Olympic Games will take place in Paris, and the Olympic Games in Paris will be a practice field for mass surveillance as it has never been experienced in Paris. So it means surveillance with algorithm, facial recognition to follow people in the streets of Paris and to actually predict behavior. And there is a certain, and I'm saying certain to be a diplomat, but there is some form of loss of responsibility on our part, where we want to start believing that most of the time they actually serve the population. But no, they are a service at the hands of the state. And secondly, when we ask for accountability to the police going via the IGPN, which is the equivalent of police police checkup authority, what they do is they revalorize the value of the police. And the question is, we must ask ourselves, what is the responsibility that each of us can carry? Not everyone can be Angela Davis, not everyone can be, but everyone can carry their own responsibilities. Because if we do not maintain this responsibility, activists cannot carry this on their own, whether Rokhaya or Assa, who are exposed to the brutal repression of states. Well, their strength is us. It's each of you, because the state knows that such or such activists is, if they know they're not supported or they're isolated or that the struggle is not carried by those most affected, this is where we will have watchmen who are out of control. Thank you.
Je vais faire un petit mot de fin. Merci beaucoup, Rokhaya Diallo.
Just a few concluding words. Thank you to Rokhaya Diallo. Thank you to Assa Traoré. Thank you to Yasser Louati. Thank you to Angela Davis. Thank you very much for participating in this exchange. It was captivating to hear you. Thank you for your struggles. I think we're charged with energy for the many years we have ahead of us of a continuous struggle. Thank you very much.